The Night 3, I/ATLAS, slid into our sky. The desert made room. Neon sank behind a strip of warehouses. The one with the broken letter T still read RAMPOLINE Park. Someone had painted "Trust No Signal" across the loading dock in chipped municipal white. Inside, we ran on coffee older than the filters and laptops that hummed like bees around a queen. I stood behind the folding table with a hand on a plastic chair that had a crack through the back. My real name is Brian Nash. The government called me a lot of things when I worked for it, but ex-CIA is the one that clings. I had been a handler long enough to know the weight of a room when people think they're about to learn the future. "This is Palomar Live," Kira said, not looking up. 25, blue buzz cut, earbuds and a rosary on the same string. On her screen, a light curve jittered, then steadied into a slope no comet should have owned. "It's not coasting. It's correcting." "What kind of correcting?" I asked. She pinched and dragged the plot. "Station keeping. And there's modulation in the tail that shouldn't be there if it's just dust and ice." Across from her, Marty leaned in with both hands on his knees, crucifix glinting. He liked to narrate his life for an invisible audience. "Like a boat trimming a sail," he said. "Nice and tidy." Lena stood by the rack mount amp we used to turn numbers into sound. She had left SETI after they decided there were safer careers than asking the universe to speak. Calm face, careful hands. "Pipe the raw spectrum," she said to Kira. Kira nodded and routed the feed. The room filled with a metallic chorus as if a pipe organ had swallowed a storm and was learning to breathe again. Some of them smiled. Marty wiped his eyes and said, "It's beautiful," like he was embarrassed to hear himself. I didn't smile. I looked at the time code. I thought about chains of command and the way bureaucracy stall when a new noun enters the room. On the far wall, 3 monitors showed 3 realities: a NASA telemetry page, a private astronomy forum that thought we were all 11 years old, and cable news, daubed in red. Third interstellar object confirmed. The anchor's eyebrows had learned awe overnight. We'd seen 2 before. Oumuamua had skated through like a tourist, done a strange rotation, and left us to fight about it. Borisov blew dust like a normal comet, except for the part where it didn't belong to our family. We'd watched. We'd argued. We'd written papers that said anomalous in polite fonts. This one decelerated. "Beat structure's regular," Lena said. "Not random plasma noise. It's sampling the spectrum. It's measuring us measuring it like it's listening to our radio in order to tune in," Marty said, then laughed at himself. "Maybe I'm the radio." Kira made a face. "Please don't be the radio." My phone buzzed in my pocket. Unknown number. I stepped out into the loading dock. The desert was all angle and dark, the air traced with dry sage. "Nash." "Brian," a woman's voice, worn to the bone by diplomatic cables and too many time zones. "It's Kim." I pictured her in a stairwell, a secure line pressed to a shoulder, another meeting waiting to swallow her when she hung up. State Department. The rare type who kept the edges of her humanity even when the job tried to sand them off. "You still collecting favors, Kim?" "Only cheap ones," she said. "We've got Defense, NASA, Space Force, everyone who owns a tie in the same chain. They want to call this engagement. I'd like to call it accuracy. You still keep friends with paranoiacs?" "I cultivate them," I said. "What do you need?" "A sense of intent," she said. "Is it signaling? Is there structure? I don't want to walk into the sit room with a smile if what I need is a seatbelt." You'll get something, I said. Soon. I hung up and went back inside. The organ noise had settled into a pattern that teased meaning even for ears that didn't want it. Kira was already in the weeds, folding the signal, shaving off obvious terrestrial harmonics, stripping down to what the object kept insisting on. Look, she said, this grid. Every few seconds, the spectrum reorganizes around these peaks. She tapped a lattice of lines that made my eyes ache. Not music. Procedure. Procedure for what? I asked. Classification, Lena said. It's running a sort, placing a source inside a framework. It looks like math because it is, but you can call it law if that helps. Marty crossed himself with a rueful grin. Judgy. Kira zoomed. A symbol repeated in a place our heads wanted to read as a box on a form. She wasn't the kind to inflate a claim. She took longer than necessary before she said, closest translation, violator of order. The room lost a few degrees of warmth. Someone in the back swore on screen. The news anchor was still giddy, handing the baton to a retired astronaut who had practiced the line about not anthropomorphizing objects so many times it had dulled into foam. The lower third chirped, White House to address nation tomorrow. The market's line chart did its roller coaster impression. It all felt like set dressing for the sound. Kim's window would close. Bureaucracies don't like words like violate near microphones. I opened the metal case on the table. Inside, a sat relay that would work even if someone cut the bigger pipes. It didn't belong to a company I could name. Kira, I said, we need a package we can pass up. Strip the commentary. Show the lattice. Show the symbol. Show the mapping from our noise to their classification. No metaphors, no guesses. Just the spine. Lena nodded. We'll include error bars and a conservative summary. And a human sentence, I said. We are being placed in a category corresponding to disruption of established order. That's the sentence. Marty hovered by the coffee maker. Do we, want to pray about this? Pray hard enough to edit the cosmos, Kira said without looking up. Or brew. He brewed. We worked. I called Kim. You asked for intent, I said when she picked up. I have something that looks like it. How bad? She asked. Not anger, I said. Worse. Indifference with a manual. They're tidy, she repeated, as if trying the word on. Send it. Use whatever doesn't light you up to the whole alphabet soup. We'll use the old satellite, I said. You'll have it in 10. Brian, she added, voice lowered, they're going to want to own this narrative. If you go public before they're ready, they'll paint you as a chaos agent. Noted, I said, but they can't ask people to stay calm and informed while shutting doors. Welcome to my Tuesday, she said, and hung up. We built the package. Kira annotated the lattice with minimal text. Lena wrote the cautious, careful paragraph. I printed a hard copy because I'm the kind of man who still trusts paper when electricity forgets manners. While the progress bars pretended to mean anything, I walked the edges of the room. The warehouse had the smell of rubber and old sweat from the trampoline days. We'd hung blankets over the ducts to muffle the exhale of our machines. A whiteboard still bore a faded rectangle of rules for PIT party safety. Someone, Marty, had added no uninvited guests in marker that bled into the ghost text. Kira clicked enter. The sat relay thunked, found the sky, did the handshake nobody in the room could hear. A minute later, we got Kim's 2-word reply on the secure back channel. Got it! On the screens, NASA's official account posted a thread urging caution while also promising wonder. The comment section made its usual bid for the worst in us and the best in our jokes. Someone suggested we were the comet, not the object, just to keep the symmetry. We waited. Waiting is a profession in some agencies. In warehouses, it's a hobby. Marty told a story about the first UFO convention he'd ever gone to, the way the vendors hawked stainless steel water bottles with alien heads on them. "Civilization's a gift shop," he said, then flushed and looked at his shoes. "Audio is shifting," Lena said, saving him from the echo of his own thought. She pointed at the waterfall. The regularities in the noise had grown more confident. "It's locking in on our broadcast schedules, our noon news, our drive time radio. It's syncing the cadence of its classification to our habits. Binding the verdict to our heartbeat," I said. It wasn't poetry. It was a fact you could feel. The room's air seemed to move to that slow beat, as if the ventilation had learned a new time signature. I stepped outside again. The desert held still the way only dry places can. Above the darker line of the mountain, a fleck of brighter dark tracked a path no comet with nothing to hide would take. I imagined a courtroom with no walls and no faces, a bench higher than orbit, a clerk made of statistics. I imagined our whole species standing in the gallery in shirts we'd chosen for the camera. My phone buzzed. Kim. "The sit room is calling this a classification artifact," she said without greeting. "They're worried you're overfitting." "They should be worried we're underfitting," I said. "Call it what you like." The label repeats in a position that maps to us. We didn't put it there. She inhaled, exhaled. I could hear footsteps on stairs, meetings, inside meetings. "We're planning an address for the morning," she said. "Language is still being chewed. Words like engagement and reassure are winning. I can't sell verdict to a room that wants conversation. You asked for accuracy," I said. "I did," she said, "and I'll keep asking. But I need to be able to breathe in there." "You'll have room if we give you cover," I said. "We'll keep the interpretation technical. We'll leave out the parts that sound like prophecy." "Thank you," she said, and the line clicked quiet. Back inside, Kira had pulled the lattice onto 3 monitors so the room could memorize the shape of what was happening to us. Lena had pinned a printout on corkboard with push pins that still wore trampoline park glitter. The repeating symbol was the only flourish on an otherwise austere city of lines. "What if it's not legal?" Marty asked, tension bleeding into wonder. "What if it's ecological? Like a forest protocol. You're an invasive, and you get tagged." "Law and ecology agree here," Lena said. "Systems preserve themselves. Your metaphors change. The math doesn't." Kira rubbed her eyes and typed something I couldn't follow. "It's not hailing us," she said. "Every time we send a directed message, it shifts the frame just enough that our signal cancels in its own noise. It's like arguing with a tunnel. So we can't talk to it," I said. "We can talk," she said, "but we're monologuing into a featureless wall that keeps repainting. It's listening for a pattern, not our content." "Then we send the pattern," Marty said, then frowned. "Wait, that's the problem. We are the pattern exactly," Lena said. "We stayed until the desert began to bleed silver again at the horizon. The coffee died brave. The organ noise rose and fell like a tide that belonged to someone else. The feeds told us the administration's press office had booked cameras for 9 a.m. Eastern. Governor's statements multiplied. Hashtags chose sides. We were not the subject. We were the exhibit. At 4, the SAT relay pinged once, an old habit from old code that signaled receipt in a language only a few systems remembered. Kim's window hadn't closed yet. Our package had a seat at a long table where relief and denial arm wrestled under names like prudence and calm. "Let's write down the human sentence," I said to Lena. "Not for them. For us." She uncapped a marker and wrote across the whiteboard in neat, even lines. "The object is running a classification procedure. It has placed Earth-originating broadcast in a category that maps to violator of order. The procedure is indifferent to our language. It is binding its cycle to ours." She put the cap back on the marker. The room read the lines like a prayer nobody had learned as a child. "Do we sleep?" Marty asked. "We nap," Kira said. "We dream of clean grids." I didn't sleep. I watched the timestamp reach and pass midnight Eastern by our math, then slip again as if time itself wanted to be helpful and show its work. At 7 local, the warehouse creaked as the sun lifted enough to poke through the high windows. Dust turned visible and stayed suspended, caught in the back and forth of a ventilation unit that had decided indecision was prudent. Outside, a truck rattled past toward a neighboring bay that still pretended to sell discount flooring. The news feed moved to shots of Pennsylvania Avenue. The press secretary adjusted papers. The Chiron promised clarity. Kira grimaced and unplugged the amp to spare us the organ's groan. Lena took a photo of the lattice for a file we kept offline. Marty filled cups nobody wanted and set them where hands could find them out of habit. When the White House seal finally appeared and the president walked out between 2 flags, I felt the old sit-rep burn under my ribs. He said we were explorers. He said we had been here before with fear and humility and come out wiser. He said international partners stood ready, that agencies would coordinate, that nothing mattered more than the safety of American families. He said we would seek peaceful engagement. He didn't lie. He also didn't say the word verdict. When the speech ended, the hashtags roared, the channels filled, the old whispers woke up in new heads. Everyone had an uncle who knew a guy at NASA. Everyone had a high school teacher who had once said, "We were not alone." Everyone went to work late. We turned the amp back on. The organ noise met us like a tide returning to a different beach. The lattice on the wall didn't change shape, but the symbol that had worried a hole in the chart looked, if a symbol can look, more confident in its placement, like a rubber stamp pressed twice to make sure it takes. "Files are delivered," Kira said, eyes on the SAT relay's logs. Their window's still open. "Then Chapter 2 starts in a few hours," I said, because saying it in those terms kept the panic behind the ribs. They'll try to talk. We'll hear the room breathing, and this thing will keep sorting, Lena finished. We stood in a warehouse that had been built for kids to bounce and fall safely, and watched our species get filed in a system that had never learned the trick of gentle landings. Outside, the desert kept its promise to hold still. Inside, we waited for the part of the story where you don't get to negotiate with the narrator. By morning, the country had washed its face and put on a calm voice. At 9 Eastern, the president stepped between flags and offered the nation a liturgy. We were explorers. We had met the unknown before. We would proceed with caution and courage. International partners stood shoulder to shoulder. Agencies were coordinating. He promised engagement. He did not say verdict. Within an hour, the sky became a bulletin board. NASA, ESA, JAXA, private constellations, anyone with a transmitter, pushed carefully crafted greetings. binary primes. Arecibo-style pictographs updated for a century that renamed everything. Pi sung in microwave. Whale song translated into tonal sweeps. Photographs of the planet as if we could sell it to a stranger by reminding them how blue it is. The replies from 3I/ATLAS were not replies. The lattice continued to turn, regular as a metronome no hand could stop. Not dialogue, Lena said, watching the spectrum align and realign on its schedule. It's mapping our attempts to talk as features of the noise. Like filing our pleas under ambient, Kira added. Rumors sprinted ahead of official statements. By afternoon, a leak with a uniform said Space Force had launched an observation vehicle, unarmed cameras and spectrometers only, to take a close look. By evening, a general stood at a podium and declassified the rumor into a shaped paragraph that promised proximity operations and enhanced understanding. We tracked the vehicle on a private feed until tracking became a guess. Its telemetry twisted sideways, not lost to interference, but persuaded into coordinates that maps didn't know how to draw. Then it was gone, not with a flare, but with the same bureaucratic grace the lattice used to sort our words. You are now in a different folder. Not destroyed, Kira said quietly. Re-indexed. The administration's tone didn't change. The president returned to a smaller podium to say this was expected in frontier science. The mission had been invaluable. New approaches were being prepared. Networks filled the gaps with soft focus panels. Former astronauts counseled patience. A futurist in a crisp jacket insisted the object would respond to a universal constant if we simply chose the right one and repeated it loudly. Outside the warehouse, Las Vegas glittered and blinked. Inside, we listened to a hum that wasn't in the room. Power companies in a crescent from Alaska through the Midwest to Florida reported hiccups, sags, harmless spikes, a second of darkness that returned with the lights fractionally warmer. The object had adjusted its orbit again, not closer, not farther, but in a phase that braided its rhythm through ours. Grid frequency is being leaned on, Lena said, tracing the data. Not enough to break anything, enough to make the system aware of itself, like putting a hand on a shoulder, Marty said, then winced at his own metaphor. A heavy hand. Kim's text arrived as 3 words. Need your read. I called her. She was breathless in that way meetings make you, lungs half owned by someone else's clock. They want to keep this under the heading of engagement, she said. We're drafting a multilateral overture for the UN. Dark sky commitments, broadcast reductions, spectrum cooperation. They think signaling humility will change the temperature. It won't see humility, I said. It will see a pattern of behavior. The pattern is still a violator in its schema. That label isn't moral. It's functional. How certain? She asked. She wasn't doubting. She needed a sentence she could carry into a room that would strip it down and see if it still spoke. Certain enough to be useful, I said. We can show placement in the lattice across multiple observation windows. The symbol is stable. The cadence is syncing to our broadcast cycles. Noon news, rush hour. It's hitching its procedure to our pulse. She exhaled into what sounded like a stairwell. Send me that phrasing. No metaphors, and she hesitated. They're considering a communications framework for information hazards. If panic spikes protocol, I said. You're not supposed to know the name, she said, and I could hear the tired smile. I'm not endorsing it. I'm telling you what's on the table. If the room decides that telling the truth is more dangerous than calming the herd. We're not the herd, I said. "We're the record." "I know," she said, "but the record doesn't vote." The call died in the small way secure calls do. By the second night, the hum had become a rhythm you felt in your molars. Weather stations measured nothing unusual. Seismographs peered at their needles and shrugged. Tides in a handful of bays arrived a few minutes early, not higher, just on a schedule that didn't match the almanac. We pulled municipal feeds into a sloppy dashboard. It looked like an arrhythmic heart, relearning a beat. "We're being entrained," Lena said. "It's knitting its cycle through critical infrastructure as if it wants the procedure to propagate via our most stable clocks. It's not sabotage," I said. "It's choreography." Kira didn't look up. Choreography to a verdict we didn't vote on. At dawn on the third day, the UN Security Council convened. The U.S. circulated a draft, 10 years to reduce terrestrial broadcast power by 90%, radio quiet zones over oceans and deserts, international verification teams, incentives for dark fiber over air. It was a masterpiece of human compromise, every verb softened, every noun given a cushion. Delegations praised leadership and urged caution. A statement was issued. It promised to be revised when science advised. 3I/ATLAS slid again, a clean lateral move that put it into a phase with different longitudes. The cadence in those grids changed to match. Hospitals reported nothing. Call centers reported callers describing a faint pressure in the ear, a sense of being watched by the room. The FAA issued and retracted a NOTAM after 5 minutes because nothing had happened, and 5 minutes was a long time to admit you didn't know what to say. We ate from vending machines and watched the screens redraw the same story with fresher chirons. Marty tried to start a prayer. No one stopped him. He stopped himself. At noon, Eastern, the White House invited religious leaders, scientists, and 3 mayors to stand behind the press secretary. Unity had a face for every camera. Questions were taken and answered in the voice of a nation managing a snowstorm. How long will this last? As long as it lasts. Are we in danger? We're monitoring closely. What can families do? Stay informed. Check on neighbors. Trust official sources. In the warehouse, we panned across the lattice taped to the cork wall. The repeated symbol sat in our box like a rubber stamp with fresh ink. We had annotated nothing. The city of Linas didn't need our graffiti to be legible. Kira rolled her chair back and stared at the ceiling. "We're out of verbs," she said. "We can send. We can plead. We can model. None of those change the classification. Then we're done pretending we're participants," I said. "We become witnesses." "To what?" Marty asked soft. "An execution?" "An administrative action," Lena said, "which feels colder." Kim called without preamble. "I pushed your phrasing," she said. "It went in the room." No one threw it out. They filed it as a possibility next to 24 palatable maybes. "They still think this can be negotiated," I said. "They think everything can be negotiated if the room is big enough," she said. "I believe in that impulse most days. Not today." "What happens when the overture gets no answer?" I asked. "Then we say we will keep trying," she said. "And then," she faltered, "and then the hazard committee convenes. They have a draft. It's what you think it is. If public channels start amplifying the wrong narratives, switches get thrown. Temporary, targeted, calming, the protocol," I said. "If they call it." "They won't call it that in public," she said. "They'll call it stewardship." "Stewardship of what?" I asked. "People or the story?" She didn't answer that. "Brian," she said instead, If you're going to do something you can't take back, do it before they decide the narrative belongs to them. The call ended with a hiss like a sigh. We let the room be quiet for a full minute. Machines breathed. The amp murmured with the objects tied. Sunlight made rectangles on the concrete and caught the dust in a frozen dance. "Okay," I said. "We go public." Kira blew out a breath she'd been holding since the first symbol resolved. "We'll get a few minutes before the sandbags go up," she said. "Maybe less." "Ham bands, pirate bands," I said. "Anything that bounces." We don't sensationalize, no graphics that look like movies. We show the lattice. We put one human sentence on it. Lena pulled a felt tip from behind her ear and wrote on a clean sheet of paper, block letters steady. We are being classified by a procedure that places human broadcasts in a category equivalent to violator of order. The procedure is indifferent to our language. It is phase-locking to our systems. She held it up. No one argued. Marty swallowed. "They'll come," he said. "Not the aliens. Ours. They'll try," I said. "We won't run. We'll finish this sentence and hit send." We rehearsed what not to say. No hope syrup, no apocalyptic theater, no claims about motives, gods, or revenge. Just the facts, the lattice, the cadence, the label, the consequence. We prepped relays. A battered sat phone that still believed in a sky without gatekeepers, a ham rig older than most of our mistakes, a scatter of modems that loved dead protocols. By dusk, the administration's multilateral overture went to New York. The Secretary General praised humanity's resolve. The French proposed a symposium. The Russians proposed a moratorium. The Chinese proposed a working group with teeth. Everyone proposed something that kept them in the room. 3I/ATLAS kept time. At midnight, the grid hum leaned another hair to the left, so slight you would have missed it if you hadn't been listening with your teeth for days. We didn't miss it. We marked the tick on the whiteboard. Kira traced it on a plot. Lena folded it into her model and watched the residuals drop as if the universe had just admitted which key it was singing in. "They're finishing their warm-up," she said. I checked the doors if any of this lived at human scale. The parking lot was empty. A plastic bag jittered in a corner and decided not to be a metaphor. I came back in and found the camera on the stack of server drawers. The lens was clean. The red tally light stared sleepily. 5 hours until the East Coast wakes, Kira said. "We do it before coffee or after?" "Before," I said. "Surprises travel farther before caffeine builds defenses." We printed the lattice one more time in case the screens forgot themselves. We taped it to the wall, edge to edge, the repeating symbol landing twice at eye height like an accusation and a signature. We tested the ham rig on a clear band and heard a voice from Utah talk about weather with a stranger in Maine. We spun the dial and found a pirate station reading poetry to truckers. We nodded to both as if we would see them again. At 3 a.m. local, Kim sent one last text. "They will call stewardship if you force it." I typed back, "We'll call it what it is." She didn't answer. She didn't need to. We set the chairs where we wanted them, framed the shot so the lattice filled the background, checked the batteries like they were talismans. The amp hummed low, the organ pulling a breath it would never release as music. The city slept through its own cross-examination. "Ready?" Lena asked. "Ready," I said, and put a hand flat on the table to stop the shake the camera wouldn't see. We were done being subjects of someone else's press conference. In a few minutes, we were going to speak into the parts of the sky that still carried voices without permission and tell anyone listening that the hearing had already happened and the ruling had been entered. We would say it plain. We would not decorate it. We would not ask for permission to be accurate. On my mark, Kira said, and the red light waited to learn what kind of story it was about to tell. We start before dawn because surprise travels farther in the dark. The warehouse is a held breath. The lattice covers the wall, a paper city of lines, and the repeating symbol that has learned to sit in our square like it was born there. The camera stares, indifferent. The ham rig hums at a whisper you feel in the bones of your face. Kira checks levels, thumbs the battered sat phone like a rosary with buttons. Lena moves the lights a finger's width, and the page behind me becomes legible without glare. Marty stands by the door as if that matters. Outside, the loading dock is an oil painting of Nevada, hard angles, dry air, a sky the color of a bruise about to bloom. On my mark, Kira says, and the red light turns into an eye. My name is Brian Nash, I say. I used to work for the government. Now I work with friends. Behind me is the only thing that resembles a translation of what's riding in our sky. It's not a speech. It's a report that forgot to put on its tie. I tell them what we've already lived. Scouts named Oumuamua and Borisov that taught the room where to hang the microphones. The third object that arrived like a clerk with a cart. I tell them about the classification lattice, about the symbol that maps to violator of order. I don't dress those words. They are already dressed in their own cold. We're not in a conversation, I say. We're being filed. Kira routes the feed everywhere that hasn't been domesticated. Dead forums, ham bands, a pirate station that recites poems to truckers at 3 a.m. The sat phone's little antenna salutes a sky that still takes calls. On the screen, the dashboards light up with more carriers than we deserve. The video moves. It is alive in places that were supposed to be empty for 47 seconds. At 48, the hum changes key. Our meters shake without moving. Kira swears under her breath. Lena's hands still. RF suppression event, Kira says. National. No. Global. The protocol. They don't call it that on paper, but you can hear the capital letter when it drops. Switches flip in rooms that smell like carpet and power. Public bands go viscous. The obvious trenches fill with sand. Our feed stutters, flattens, begins to take on the texture of a pond skinning over at first frost. Marty looks at me, waiting for a command that will teach walls how to be courageous. Ham bands, I say. Skip it. Anything that bounces. Don't fight the rivers. Find the gutters. Kira's fingers wrap the rig into a different life. Old circuits warm. The room fills with people who never stopped believing that voices like theirs were the real weather. A ranger in Montana asking about a trail. A long haul in Tennessee asking about a child's fever. An old man in Maine telling someone he'd never met that the moon seemed wrong. Lena hands me a card with our sentence written in steady letters. We are being classified by a procedure that places human broadcasts in a category equivalent to violator of order. The procedure is indifferent to our language. It is phase-locking to our systems. I say it slowly so anyone listening can copy it by hand on a grocery receipt and pass it under a door. I picture Kim in a stairwell with the phone to her ear, eyes closed, a room above her practicing comfort. I picture a kid in Omaha building a crystal radio with a paperclip and a coin, hearing my voice like a ghost who refuses to knock. For a minute, maybe two, it works. The feed crosses state lines like the old songs used to. Then the waters rise. One band grays out. Then another. The pirate station reads our sentence once, twice, like a prayer for truckers and night shift guards. Then it coughs and goes to a continuous tone that means, I'm here, I'm here, I'm here. Somewhere, someone pulls a lever labeled stewardship and feels virtuous. We keep recording even if no one is watching. We owe the act to the act itself. I talk about the cadence knitting through our infrastructure, about tides arriving on an unfamiliar minute, about how the object isn't angry, it's efficient. I don't say judgment. The word would do too much work for the wrong team. Time, Lena says softly. If they're coming, they'll be here. They'll be busy, I say. Everybody is. The floor shivers as if the warehouse has decided to remember that it used to be steel and concrete instead of air and idea. The bulb over our heads swings once and steadies. Dust lifts and hangs and refuses to land. Outside, the horizon brightens without admitting dawn. The hum that hasn't lived in any speaker grows a spine. Grid just stepped, Kira says, eyes on a side monitor that still talks to a friend in a power company. Half a hertz? Like a conductor tapping the stand, warm-up's over, Lena says. The first seam opens in the air above the parking lot, as tidy as a box cutter through shrink wrap. It doesn't split with noise. It organizes. The sky develops edges where no edges belong. The stars do not wink out. They rearrange as if someone riffling a deck decided 9s and 10s would sit better together. Marty presses his palms together on instinct that is older than taxonomy. Oh God, he whispers, then corrects himself. Oh God of filing cabinets, and almost laughs until the air takes the breath back. The lattice on the wall lifts at the corners, peels, drifts. The symbol we've been translating since we met it seems to breathe. I know it's paper. I know it isn't. I know too many things at once, and none of them are useful. I lean into the camera as if it were a person I could love into understanding. If you can hear me, anyone, this is administrative. They are revising the reference frame, not breaking, re-indexing. You don't fix a song by yelling at the radio. You change the key. The ham rig coughs our words back at us with a delay that isn't physics and isn't mercy. For 1 second, we hear our own voices through a path that wasn't there when we built the rig. For the next, we hear nothing, because nothing has learned a better way to be quiet. Kim's name flashes on my phone and disappears. She is in a room with windows that don't open, trying to convince language that it has to grow new bones in an hour. I want to tell her she did everything anyone could do. I want to tell her that honesty is a kind of survival, even when bodies don't make it. I let the phone die with dignity. The warehouse changes shape by a whisper. The lines in the concrete floor forget where they used to lead and become the start of a different map. The exit sign over the door continues to glow even though our breaker panel has decided it works for someone else. Outside, a siren tries to do its job and howls in a key it didn't rehearse. It fades as if embarrassed. Lena reaches for Kira and doesn't have to find her hand because it's already there. Marty lowers his head and breathes like a man learning to be small on purpose. I stay with the lens because the last decent thing I own is a steady voice. We were never the main characters, I say. We were evidence, and the clerk is very good at their job. The bulb pops. The room goes half dark, lit by screens that don't care who pays the bill. Then the screens learn better manners and turn themselves off, one at a time, with the unassailable calm of a system that does not need our consent. The last thing glowing is the red tally light. It holds on longer than makes sense. It dies the way a candle does when a child is allowed to finish singing. It is kinder than it needs to be. Outside, the seam widens. The sun is the same and not. The color of gold shifts a fraction toward a palette nobody asked to learn. Clouds crystallize for a heartbeat into facets and then unlearn the trick. The moon moves enough to make the stomach lurch and then behaves itself. The horizon steps closer, the way a stranger does when they have decided you belong to them. The floor bucks and then apologizes. We sway together like people on a slow train that changes tracks without slowing. The air forgets how to carry dust downward. The dust hangs, organized, waiting for the new rules to tell it what down is. Marty says a prayer he's never practiced. It is short and contains no requests. Lena squeezes Kira's hand until her knuckles blanch. Kira does not say the word sorry. She is busy watching the world run the code she would have loved to understand with enough time. I turn away from the dead camera and speak anyway because speech is a habit that feels like dignity even when the stage has been struck. We were not the protagonists, I say into the new air. We were statistics in someone else's evidence. The warehouse sighs and settles. The door opens onto a parking lot that is a parking lot by name only. The angle of the world is the same enough to pass, different enough to be true. Somewhere, a child stops crying. In the exact instant, a mother's body remembers the clock is wrong. Somewhere, an old man stands up because the chair no longer matches his idea of sitting. Somewhere, the ocean tries out a new minute and decides it prefers it. Somewhere, too, a committee drafts a statement in a vocabulary we will learn fast. Stewardship, continuity, orderly transition. They will say what they can. They will believe it. They will not be lying. In the warehouse that used to be a trampoline park, under a sign that once told kids to jump feet first, we don't move. The amp is quiet. The rigs are quiet. The air has chosen a direction and will tell us later what it is called. I think of the first time a spark crossed human air on purpose, how proud that noise must have felt. I think of Oumuamua skating through while we argued about whether it noticed us. I think of Kim in a stairwell, and of a nation that tried to be brave in sentences. I think of every hand that ever built a radio and pointed it at the dark. We were seen, we were sorted, we were, for a brief and ridiculous moment, a chorus. Marty opens his eyes. Is this? He can't find the noun. None of us can. Filed, Lena says, because she is the only one who knows how to give a word away without breaking it. We stand there longer than the scene needs. Outside, the new sky holds. The progress bar no one can see finishes and vanishes with tasteful efficiency. The world is a cleaner file. Our names are somewhere in a footer. In the end, there is no window shattering, no tidal wall, no fire. There is only the quiet click of an index updated, and a planet that sits a fraction of a degree closer to a rule it didn't write. The record closes without fanfare. What remains is the urge to leave a note in the margins. If anyone finds this, now, later, in whatever passes for after, let the note be simple. We tried to tell the truth to each other while the room still belonged to us. We were not the heroes. We were the evidence. And we showed up for court.